Hello and welcome to CharitEpulse, your bi-weekly dive into the heart of the charity sector. Remember not to miss future episodes by hitting the follow button on whichever streaming platform you are listening on. My name is Catherine Rastomji. I head the charities practice at Shakespeare Martineau, and I'm joined today by my fellow co-hosts Charles Mesquita, charities director at Quilter Cheviot, and James Saunders, partner at Moore Kingston Smith. Together we explore the latest insights and pressing issues affecting charities, non-profit organisations and the voluntary sector. Whether you're a charity professional, a passionate volunteer, or simply someone who cares about making a difference, there's something here for you. So grab your headphones and get ready to engage with the vital conversations shaping the future of the charitable landscape. And don't forget, you can also catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube, as well as on our websites. Let's get started. So recently we had the Charity Law Association annual conference, and this included a closing keynote speech from David Holdsworth, who is the fairly newly appointed Chief Executive of the Charity Commission. It was a very interesting content, I think, to his speech generally. But one of the points I particularly noted was he made reference to there being at least 700,000 trustees of registered charities, covering nearly 1 million trustee positions. He also went on to explain that the Commission is undertaking research at the moment with pro bono economics to understand better who these individuals are that are charity trustees and what their particular skills are. So I'd just be interested in your comments, thoughts, observations, and I think particularly also around trustees of grant-making charities, because we are seeing that as a repeating story at the moment that's coming through about the challenges that they're facing. James, do you want to kick us off?
I think those stats will be interesting to examine. As you said, 700,000 trustees covering nearly 1 million trustee positions. Obviously, there's people doing more than one. It'd be interesting to know how many are doing more than one and what that in 1 million trustee positions, how many people are doing more than 1, 2, 3 or whatever, and seeing what the pool is. And you mentioned grant-making charities, and there's been more this week about grant-making charities pausing or having a hold on their operations, seemingly because of, as we've talked about before, the overwhelming demand. And when those grant-making charities in particular, there is often a responsibility on trustees to be involved in that grant-making process, isn't there? We all see that. It's not just a management team decision on that sort of thing. The family trusts and those sort of things that have those very involved trustees. So that's where it becomes a more of a part-time job, doesn't it, than just a role at the head of, or anything that is that much more hands off. So all of that, I think that will be very interesting to try and understand what skills trustees generally are bringing to the table and where the strengths are.
Absolutely. And Charles, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about trustees is you can be, anybody from the king down to the lowest in the land, and everybody has an ability to become a trustee. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. I'm not sure how helpful it's going to be. I slightly wonder why they're asking the question. So, do they have real concerns about how charities are being governed? I mean, certainly from my experience over the last 30 years, I think most boards do a bloody good job.
Yeah.
The bit that I found most interesting in his speech was this concern about people not reading their guidance. And I think he came up with a figure of only around 26%. Well, I mean, yeah, does that really surprise you? I mean, I'm sorry, when I become a trustee of a charity, I don't go, ooh, wow, I can go and read Charity Commission guidance and become all excited about the various issues. I mean, I think people will use that guidance when there's an issue. But I think fundamentally, they're just applying common sense and getting on with it, focusing on actually their beneficiaries and purpose of the charity was set up for. So I slightly struggle with the I don't know quite where they're coming from and why, other than if they have engagement with charity trustees. I've noticed, actually, coming in from our chief executives, we've had a number of letters from the Charity Commission telling the chief executive to circulate to the wider trustee board, which I've never seen before, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing, because that will get people to read it. But, is there a fundamental problem? Because, I mean, you could spend, the next thing will be, we'll all have to do CPD, won't it? Continuous professional development as a volunteer. You talk about the number of trustees. I mean, I have to say I'm probably a bit excessive with 3, but I was working it out the other day of how many hours I actually spend per year. And it's a lot. It slightly surprised me, because, it isn't just 4 meetings a year for trusteeships. It's the preparation of those. It's the subcommittees and everything else. And then it's all the other stuff. So, I think it'll be interesting to see what they come out with and what Pro Bono comes out with.
Charles, you're also talking there about your model of trustees, 4 meetings a year and the preparation. But there are a lot of charities where the trustees are far more hands-on. They don't have employees and management teams, and many very, very effective small charities which are trustee-led and trustee-run. And that, the hours that must go into those, I mean, I've sat on a couple of them, the hours that go in, as I described it earlier, a part-time job easily, in the absence of staff.
And we should applaud and celebrate them for doing it. I mean, I do remember my first trusteeship was our local village hall. We didn't have any employees. So, once a month as the trustees, we used to turn up, on a Saturday morning and go and sort of do the general maintenance and gardening and stuff that needed to be done around it. It was good fun. It was a community activity. But you're right.
And there is a balance as well. I mean, the latter part of the speech talks about what the Charity Commission are going to do, and we've started, as you described, we've started to update our guidance. That's not the priority. It really isn't. The guidance is fine as it is, and if that's going to be the main focus straight away and take up time, the focus is wrong. I know you said, Charles, CPD is not, that's not what you want for trustees, but some training would be useful, and access to training and training resources would be really useful. At the moment, it's done by the support sector, i.e. lawyers, accountants. We do our trustee training sessions, but they're not formal. They're not structured or anything like that. So I honestly think there's in the second half there are far more subjects that should be covered with more effort than updating the guidance.
I wouldn't be a fan of the Charity Commission delivering training.
No, I'm not saying they should deliver it, but I think they should find a better way of delivering training than relying on the likes of us to do it.
I think there is plenty of opportunity out there for trustees to sort of further their knowledge and education around the responsibilities, as you say, coming from solicitors, accountants, investment managers, and also the umbrella bodies. I mean,
they do. Yeah, I agree. Yes, they do. Yeah, but
I actually think
always, it's very unstructured.
If there was one thing I would do if I was the commission, I would. They did some very good short videos, and I would do more of those, because I actually think the way that people are absorbing information is different, rather than thinking about, what was it? The one we had, was it CC27 or the
decision
one
making?
And instead of taking 25 minutes, it only takes 12 minutes to read. I mean, great that they've simplified the English and made it easier for people to understand. I think absolutely fantastic. But I just look at my children. They don't read books these days. I'm slightly horrified by that. But they absorb their information in a completely different way. And I think the Commission, if it wants to do one thing, it probably needs to respond in that way and just modernise the way it delivers its guidance.
Agreed. Okay, so I'm going to take us next to the Prime Minister pledging his new partnership with charities as he announces a new covenant, which we have explored could mean many different things to many different people, depending on whether you're male, female, and your age demographic, to know Marvel baddies or witches. But what he has talked about is a new partnership with the voluntary sector. The language, very positive, I thought, or perhaps too much. the covenant would unlock the dynamism, innovation, and trusted reach of civil society. But they have already said previously that there wouldn't be any extra funding for charities. So I would just welcome your thoughts. I've seen a lot of press this morning from the umbrella bodies that were at the meeting. Clearly, we weren't, about how positive it was, looking to the future, what's coming next. But I did wonder, have we been here before with another initiative in previous years? And would this actually make much of a difference? Charles, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I did. My mind went back to the Blair Brown days when we had the compact, and I was trying to think about out of that compact where there was quite a lot of money spent, what actually are the lasting results of it. And I have to say, I couldn't remember one single thing. I don't want to be negative about this, because I think it's great that that the Prime Minister has stood up. I think having a reset of the relationship between government and charities, I think there are some really simple things that they could do, like no VAT on shared services, which wouldn't cost the government anything because people aren't sharing. So that would just allow charities to be more efficient. I think the way that the funding of charities is done, could again be simplified and over longer periods, so that there is less cost to charities actually having to apply. I think the one thing that they should reiterate time and time again is that charities shouldn't really be pointing out the problems. It needs to come forward with solutions, and really positive solutions, and focus on those, and not look to government to provide those solutions. There isn't going to be any more money. And the final thing, which is I suppose a bugbear of mine for years, and I think that we do need to define of what is the responsibility of the state and what falls outside that, because until we have that clarity, it makes it really difficult. But I can't see any government or any politician wanting to change that status quo.
James.
Yeah. I would still go back to Charles's point that it's going to depend on the money, isn't it? It really is. And you can be as positive as you want about it. And yes, the umbrella groups have been involved and seem to have been very positive about it generally. But it will depend on the money. Again, going back to my point about the grant making charities earlier, I've been talking to a couple recently, a couple of clients, and they are overwhelmed with applications. And that's, a big reason is that there just simply isn't enough money coming out of government at the moment. And what money is coming out is quite difficult to get hold of. We've talked about the application processes, and so it's more money. It's a more streamlined, a fairer way of getting it to the right people, because people in the organizations in the charity sector do know what they're doing. They do what they do very well. They just need the funds to be able to do it on a bigger scale, and with a fairer reward, rather than either going into reserves or looking for outside of government funding.
Interesting. And there was another article this week, James, that said that was one aspect of it, but one of the topics said 1 in 3 respondents were worried that budget constraints on their services could lead to brand damage. I wasn't quite sure of the connection there, but the headline was 2/3 of charity investment chiefs concerned about potential reputational and brand damage. And again, your thoughts on that? Do you think that's coming from the financial constraints?
Yeah, and similarly, more stats around 9 in 10 charities facing increased demand. Voluntary organisations say they're looking to, needing to reduce sizes of workforce and reduce overhead. So it is, it's easy for me to say with a finance hat on, but it is to do with the finances. It is tight out there. Certainly, no one's flush with money. As I said, it's either reserves or new sources or different sources of funding. There is positive support out there, but it is from philanthropists, it's from social entrepreneurs, it's from different organisations who I think recognise that there is a shortfall in funding, the traditional sources of funding for the sector, but want to get in. But of course, it means charities have got to pivot how they deal with these organisations and change their tactics and their approach, and get their strategy and get their efforts across in a different way.
And there was one statement that said the rise of social media is making it more difficult for organisations to answer criticism. But Charles, I know we've talked about not necessarily social media, but how charities can get in front of a story rather than always being on the back foot. So I did wonder again whether you might agree with some of these comments or not.
Yeah, no, I think I wonder whether this is around the core cost funding, and because if you remember, it wasn't that long ago that we've had a whole lot of charities stating that the cost of delivering services is not rising in line with inflation, and then on the other side, they've seen government obviously settle wages with a number of areas of key workers. So there is this fundamental problem, and I think this also goes to the nub about charities have been subsidizing the state in the respect is that they have found the money to not stop delivering the services even if money has reduced, and so you've ended up with charities actually having to put in their own money to fund the services, and I think we've probably just got to breaking point, and I don't know, but I assume that the reputational damage is that if they have to withdraw that, of course, is the charity's going to get blamed, not government, for not funding them properly. And the narrative, of course, and then you've got that issue, haven't you, about central government to local government to charities, and then there's so where's the blame going to lie? So, I think if any of that can be cleared up, but again, I wonder whether actually government will want to clear that up, because if it does, it then has to start taking responsibility for some cuts in services and admitting that they can't deliver it.
Yeah. And then our final story for this week, quite a headline-grabbing title of the charity sector is too precious, too disjointed and too defensive, NPC chief says. As we have discovered, if you actually read the article, that's not actually what it says. But I did wonder whether you had any thoughts about what's happening within the sector and how charities are organising themselves. James, do you want to?
Yeah, I thought the same as you. I thought that the overall speech, if you like, or the content was reasonably quite positive. But unfortunately, the headline wasn't particularly pleasant, as you say, too precious, too disjointed, too defensive. I think that was some way down the speech, but at the same time, it was much more positive. I think it was meant in a positive manner as well. If we could get even 10% more out of the sector, then the UK world would be a much better place. So it's quite positive in many ways. It's not disguising, as there's mention of it's a difficult world out there, as we've described already. But yeah, it was there was some quite good stuff in there, but unfortunately, not that point about too precious, disjointed, and defensive isn't is completely wrong. But to say that that's the reason that there aren't more mergers, for example, I think is a little bit of a disconnect, really.
Yeah, I have to say, having been through a merger, I can tell you there are very good reasons why charities don't. The complexity of it, and the time and the distraction is something not to enter lightly. So I always think that there are not too many mergers. The bit that I suppose I lightened on was the difference between competition versus collaboration. And actually, funnily enough, I do share that view. I think we should be collaborating more, and we should be less precious. And I do find it remarkable how reluctant people can be, both at senior management and trustees, about actually trying to work in partnership. But partnerships are difficult. There is a hell of a lot of trust that needs to be there, and somebody needs to drive it. And if you lose the individual driving it, that can make it very vulnerable. But charities, by their very nature, in the respect that of what they do, the benefiting of society, should mean that collaboration should actually work very well, and that there shouldn't be a need to compete with one another. However, I know that the environment, particularly around funding, has lended itself towards competition rather than collaboration.
Well, thank you both. I'm going to draw us to a close here. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Charity Pulse. We hope you found our discussion insightful. If you do have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. We'd also love to hear from anyone who was a big fan of the Compact, had good experiences and misses it deeply. So feel free to argue back or contradict any of our comments and opinions. Don't forget to follow us, leave a review, share our podcast with your network, and join us next time as we continue to explore the challenges and opportunities facing the sector. And until then, keep the pulse of charity beating strong.